One.
Mm.
Let's go. Our guest
Sure.
today is an ex tech strategist who discovered that time and money don't add much to the finer things in life. Over the course of his colorful career, he's worked at companies like Google, Niantic Labs, the creators of Pokemon Go, and Deloitte. This experience has taken him all around the world, from places all over America, Europe, Middle East, Japan, Korea, China, and a 3 year stint in London. Along the way, he's been exposed to many facets of life and a diverse set of mindsets, ranging from product management, business development, operations, and venture. Not bad for an immigrant kid from Shanghai who grew up in San Francisco Bay Area. Today, he leads the home of mind mappers and connected thinkers at Mind Map Nation, where he helps people and working professionals discover their own balance of internal mastery and external curiosity, drawing on his experience and lessons from life, nature, and Stoic philosophy. Please help me in welcoming our guest to the show, Sheng Huang. Sheng, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show today, man. Appreciate having you here.
Thank you so much, Harpreet. I really appreciate it. And that was a good bio. I wrote a good one. No, the
Yeah,
first time
man.
having it read back to me. I like that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Dude, so a little bit of background. Shang is probably the first guest I recruited in person. We met, I think it was end of September.
It was
Yeah, it was,
Intel Ignite
that's right.
Accelerator. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Intel Ignite Accelerator. We're at, I forgot, was it Fleming's Steakhouse? There's like this cool event going on. And
Yeah.
we just started chatting. I was like, dude, I love mind maps. I actually used mind maps a lot when I was kind of transitioning into data science and just learning things. And it was a technique that
Mhm.
was helpful, and I guess I just kind of lost touch with it. But us go ahead and kind of dive into it. Give us a little bit of an intro into like what mind maps are. One of your videos on your channel, your YouTube channel, which I'll link to in the description
Yes.
here, you mentioned that everything's a system,
Yes.
and so
Yeah.
that anything, no matter how complex, we could break it down into simple parts so that we can
Yes.
analyze, understand, and improve.
Yeah.
Then you talk about this triple layer framework. So real quick, let's kind of talk about that. You mentioned systems thinking as an important key to this. So what is systems thinking?
Yes. So actually, I should back up a little bit and say
Yeah.
that, everything is a system and everything we do is a project. And I'll break that down, what that actually means. So everything is a system means that, everything can be broken down into simpler parts, right? That's actually all it means. I think systems thinking has a lot of jargon attached to it. It has a lot of, like connotations and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's about thinking about like, things a little bit more holistically, right? So even let's say this Apple Watch, right? It's got the strap, it's got the case, the case, the glass, the hardware inside, the software. So if I were to look at even this Apple Watch as a system, it will be not just the sum of its components, but also how the components actually interact with each other to create not just the product, but actually the experiences that we have or the applications that we run on the Apple Watch. So the same thing can apply to actually, our society, right? At large, any business, for example, or even ourselves, right? We are literally a system of like neural, basically nerves, blood vessels, and everything. And then our mindsets are also systems of essentially all the different cultural impulses and stuff like that we're exposed to. So that's what I mean by everything's a system, which is great because that means every system can be broken down into its simplest parts so that we can actually understand it better. And I think this is where the power of systems thinking is really good at deconstructing complexity, right? Because if you look at anything in our world these days, chaos is just going to be increasing, complexity is increasing just because of, the rate of development and change. So having this mindset, even that anything can be broken down into its simpler parts, is phenomenally powerful in today's age.
And so from there, let's get into that. Like your triple layer framework. Was that the triple layer framework that you broke down for us
Yes.
there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. And so this, like, how does this connect to I guess using mind maps?
Yeah.
And how can we, um, Well, we'll talk about how we can use mind maps in a second, but let's make that connection there between
Yeah,
systems, then the triple layer framework, and then this notion of a mind map.
yeah, definitely. So I would say that systems. So mind maps. I should actually describe what mind maps are first of all, right? At its basic, form, a mind map. The anatomy of any mind map is that it has its central topic, its central node, and then it expands out into its child nodes, right? So I Apple Watch example, right? Apple Watch would be the central node, and then the strap would be essentially, a child node, and then the Apple Watch itself will be its child node as well. And then you just keep on breaking it down from there. That's basically the basic anatomy of a mind map. So in a lot of ways, a mind map is the visual language of systems. You can represent systems a lot better with maps than, let's say, with like linear text, right? So you can write an entire, let's say, essay about a particular system, or you can just draw a mind map of its different components and use arrows to represent the connections, right? So that's kind of where the linkage is. What mind maps are really helpful for actually is, so this is actually related to my second statement, which is everything we do as a project, right? So we think about even like, this podcast that we're on, right? That's a project. There's a whole process and number of steps that goes involved with it. There's different platforms you are using in order to both produce, but also deliver and then distribute and market the podcast as well. So in that sense, a project also has many different components that make it into essentially a system. And then every project goes from states or go through states of chaos and order over time, right? So how I like to visualize or think about mind maps in their use cases is that they're really good at organizing the complexity or the chaos in the beginning of projects, or whenever projects go through like chaos phases, you're able to use mind maps to organize things again, to understand, hey, what are the next steps I need to take? But these are the variables I need to consider, and then put them in a sequence, for example.
Okay, so like let's say you're trying to like study a particular topic, right? Like
Yeah.
at first, everything you're kind of just like uh, consuming information. Maybe it's very like uh, uh, divergent, right? Like you're just going a little bit everywhere, bits at a time, and then once you get into the mind map, then you start converging, right? You start kind of putting things into like little pockets where they belong, right? So
Yeah.
the way I remember using this back when I was studying, let's just say like tree-based methods for machine learning, right? I had like a central kind of node in the middle of the paper, and I call that tree-based methods, and then each like node would be a different one, like random forest, add a boost,
Yep.
whatever, gradient boosting methods, XGBoost,
Yes.
and then
Yes.
from that thing branching out, then when I go down to like random forest, I could have like hyperparameters and what do they mean and things like that, and so it's able to kind of connect everything together in like a big picture kind of way. Is that kind of how to think about
That's
that?
exactly it. Yeah. I mean, you described it in kind of like the machine learning learning perspective.
Mm,
I would say that the way that I've used it, for example, is actually running up learning curves whenever I join a new company,
mm,
right? So I've actually a little bit about myself. I've pretty much done everything except for engineering, like basically in tech, right? I was a product manager, business strategist, sales analyst, business developer, designer, everything. So I've jumped around actually 6 different companies over the course of all my years. And the annual tenure is, I mean, the typical tenure is around 2 to 3 years. So whenever I jump into a new role or new industry, the first thing I do is map out the company, its org chart, everything about it, what is its product, what is it, both internal in the company, but also external where it sits in the market, right? So internally, it is like the people, the processes, the product. And then the external is, for example, um, where our company and markets, what is the market, first of all? What are the dynamic, like, the competitive dynamics of that particular market? How does our product, stack up against everything else? So once you actually map everything out, you have a much more solid understanding of not only where the company sits, but also where you sit within the company, because you are just a subset of a system called the company. The company is part of a larger system called the market, which then is a larger part of a larger system called the economy.
How did you get into mind maps, man? Like, like I'm curious to this journey to mind maps because they are
Yeah.
such an effective way to take notes. And has this been something that you've been doing since you're a little kid, or like was there a point in time where you're like, oh my god, this is amazing? Like, walk us through
Yeah,
your
man.
personal journey.
It's that's a great question. Because I have been mapping for over 13 years now, right? It's gotten to a point where it is almost like secondhand. I almost think in terms of maps and deconstructive ways. But I really first picked it up when I was a student consultant back at Berkeley. So in undergrad Berkeley, I was part of this organization called Berkeley Consulting. And this is where you get like undergrad college students to go consult for like Fortune 100 companies, right? So it was an amazing experience where one day they brought in, I remember it was probably a Bain consultant. And he taught us essentially deconstruction, thinking like an analyst, and using mind maps to understand problems, since we're solving all these problems for our clients. Um, and right there and then was like an aha moment for me, because it was like, holy crap, there you can basically, I realized you can actually deconstruct some really complex things by using some simple bubbles and lines, right? I was like, here it was such a tool that was very, very simple to pick up, but could be used in many different permutations. So, and I think this actually kind of really resonated with me too, because it was also a form of drawing. So I used to be an artist growing up, right? So, and I always kind of tell people that, like we kind of learn to draw before we learn to write or even read. So it's actually a very like innate thing for a lot of human beings to just draw. I'm not even talking about like trying to draw like, like Leonardo da Vinci or something like that, right? Literally just like sticks and stuff like that. If you can draw stick figures, you can do mind mapping, right? So that was the origins of me being introduced to the tool. But then over the years, it was when I joined Google that it was on their strategy team, it was just full of other ex-management consultants, right? And then suddenly I was surrounded by a group of other people who literally use this tool to actually, come up with go-to-market strategies. So that was really validating. And it wasn't until I would say kind of around when I went to London for my MBA and stayed there for my post grad jobs and stuff, that I actually started using mind maps to kind of untangle my internal self, right? Almost like a tool of self-discovery. And it was through that, it was like, oh, I can actually define how I feel, even like emotion mind mapping. That to this day is actually still one of my most popular videos, actually, is that now people are going like, oh, you can actually use this tool, not just for organizing external chaos, but also internal chaos.
What's the title of that video? I'd love to share that with folks.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's literally called emotions mind mapping. If you search that on YouTube, it's going to be the first result.
that's definitely something I'm going to look into right after this because I need some untangling of my internal internal state. Emotions mind mapping by Sheng. Let's definitely look that up, y'all. So hey, let's go through like a just kind of a hypothetical scenario how we
Yes.
can use a mind map. And
Hmm.
we'll do so. I've got this podcast, obviously you're on it, the artist of data
Yeah.
science. So I've got a couple of different formats for this podcast. One is this
Yeah.
kind of what we're doing here, this one-on-one interview.
Yeah.
And another one is like I do what's called a happy hour, and every Friday,
Yeah.
4:30 p.m. Central Time, people come in and we just have really an unstructured conversation that kind of goes anywhere, right? We talk about a wide variety of things. And what I want to do is I want to create a new episode format that's kind of like a narrative nonfiction style of a
Mhm.
podcast. If you're familiar with like This American Life, for example,
Oh,
where there's
yeah.
yeah something like that, where it's like, okay, I've settled on a theme for a particular topic, and I'm narrating the podcast and bringing in voice clips from different
Mhm.
episodes.
Yes.
So that
Very
episode
cool.
can center around a particular theme or topic. I do the narration, splice in sound bites from episodes. But
Yep.
I'm wondering like how can I use mind maps to help me with this type of project?
Yes. Okay. So that's actually a perfect one, because this is almost like a new project for you, right? It's a branch off of an existing kind of like, platform. So the first way I would actually say, if you were to actually think about your entire like content career or creator career as a system, then you would have multiple branches coming out, right? You could either group it by platform, right? Or group it by medium. So right now we're on video. So maybe there's a branch that comes out of video and then another one comes out from audio. But since it's audio and together, let's just call it podcast, right? Let's say it's Harpreet right here, creator, career, right? And then the next node would be podcast. And then from podcast, you would have the 3 or the 2 existing formats you currently have. And then the one that's branching off, because you have this one, what we're currently on. What do you call this actually?
This is the Artist of Data Science, but it's just like a regular one-on-one interview type of thing.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say it's one-on-one interview. That's like, a child node under podcast. Another one would be happy hour, right? And then the final one would be like narrative nonfiction. You could come up with another name for that, right? So now you have this all expanded. And then the next question I would actually ask for any new project are actually 6 questions. And you can map this out too, which is why, right? Why, who, what, how, when, and metrics. Those are the 6 parts that I would expand out from essentially, the narrative nonfiction podcast. So, and then we will go through all 6 of these nodes and ask, okay, why do you want to have it? And the other thing is, if you map out the other why from the other components, let's say happy hour as well as the one-on-one interviews, then you can see if there's actually any conflicts of interest or whatever it is, or maybe it's synergistic, right? But by mapping out, let's say even the whys for all 3 of these, then you can see, okay, how do they work together or how are they antagonistic to each other, right? Same thing with how. Maybe the how is exactly the same, then that's great because that means you don't need to actually put any additional overhead in order to start this new project because you already have this existing infrastructure, right? So I would say by mapping all these different components out, it's much easier to see where first of all, where your priorities are, what is your existing portfolio of content as well as production and process, and where this new project fits amongst this entire, the entirety of your system, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. So if we drill down a little bit further, like, for example, an individual episode, let's kind of think about the episode from like a note-taking perspective, right? Because those happy hour sessions and really most podcasts, right? They tend to go everywhere, right? Like they tend to kind of sprawl out. How can we use mind maps to help us better digest the information in like a podcast episode? Because I'm sure the people listening to this podcast, they listen to a bunch of other podcasts, and
absolutely,
yeah, like, you listen to like a Lex Friedman episode or Machine Learning Street Talk. There's like 3-hour-long episodes, and
exactly,
it's one thing to sit there and just like Cornell style notes, I guess is that what it's called, the top down fashion, where you're like they talk about this. But how would we do that in a mind map?
Yes. It's definitely possible. In fact, I've actually made like 2 to 3 tutorials around specifically podcast mind mapping as well as mind mapping lectures, because they're kind of one the same. If you think about it, it's like 2 people talking versus 1 person talking doesn't really matter, right? Content is content, knowledge is knowledge. So in this way, before I would even recommend anybody do mind mapping for podcasts or lectures, I will actually have to ask you, how serious are you about learning, right? Because here's the thing, how many times have we like just watched a YouTube video or podcast, listen to podcasts, and then we forget everything, like 90% of it, like just an hour later, like the next meeting, jump in the next meeting, you're like, I freaking forgot what I learned. And a lot of it is because when we're passively listening, it's just like, going on like a one-on-one or even a date, for example, right? If you're just passively listening, you're probably not very engaged and you're not really deeply listening or engaging with either the person or the material. What mind mapping forces you to do is to be extremely intentional and also attentive. It actually forces you into a deep listening state. However, that also means that it's going to be a lot more intensive. You're gonna feel a little bit tired afterwards, like your brain actually has gone through a workout, right? But you're also going to retain a lot more because you're actually engaging 3 different types of learning. One is motor, because you're using your hands. It's the same thing that people, how to learn soccer or football. The other one is pictorial. So basically drawing and using, let's say, different connections, different lines and stuff like that, spatial, right? And then the final one is semantic, essentially the understanding of language and symbols. And that's That the last one is the one that we use primarily when we're actually note taking using linear, English or words essentially, right? By mapping, you're incorporating all three, and therefore you're actually richly encoding the knowledge that you are absorbing in. So with that said, if you're ready to actually like do a deep learning, of that material, then yes, use mind mapping. Now, the mechanism of actually, the technique of going about it is that first, what I like to do is I draw the mind map. The center node, the central topic is the topic of the talk, or the person, right? And then the second one is not even about the podcast itself. It's actually about the speaker. I actually want to learn more about who is actually talking. So for example, before I jumped on here, Harpreet, I actually made kind of the podcast mind map myself, right? And I put you and I said, hey, what about Harpreet? Well, DevRel community, we met at Ignite, and podcast artists of data science. These different things actually tell me a lot about the speaker, because in order for me to really resonate with the material, I have to understand who is it actually coming from. I feel like a lot of people just jump in a podcast without really understanding where it's coming from as well. But that's important because that's part of like forming your own opinions, not just taking it as is, right? So then the second one is then the topics of the talk. If you're a lecture or a meeting or a conference, typically they'll have like an agenda up front. That's gold, right? Because then you can actually map out, you can actually like write out the topics in a map, and you can just like expand those points as they come up. However, if it's a free-flowing conversation like this, then that's actually great too, because mind maps are by nature nonlinear, just like conversations. Conversations are super nonlinear, right? You can jump around everywhere, connect the dots, close loops. So this is where you can actually just expand out the topics, draw lines and stuff like that. Don't worry about the organization first. I feel like with typical note taking, people even get stressed out when they feel like, oh crap, this is, what they're talking about belongs over here. With a map, it doesn't really matter. You expand out that topic, that topic, park it. If they change topics, draw another one, right? If they go back to it and draw more lines and expand that node.
That's awesome, Sheng. Thank you so much. There's some great comments coming into LinkedIn Live here. Kingsley saying topic is getting very interesting. Just imagining how using minimal tools helps me explain any project I do. Do you have a tool or resources to help me learn more, Sheng? Well, yeah, Sheng's got an awesome YouTube channel. Check that out. Sheng's also got a community that he's launching that I'm going to be joining this community. Talk to us a little bit about this community and what it's all about.
Yeah, so My Map Nation is the community's name, and I actually started it 3 months ago. Off the back of my YouTube channel, which now has around like 21,000 subscribers. Really what it's about is, because I recognize over the last 2 years of being on YouTube, is that, everybody has a different way of mapping, precisely because we have different ways of thinking, right? And what I realize is that we also have many different experiences. Therefore, the two combined means that the number of ways of mind mapping or techniques out there is actually endless. It's almost like matching the number of like ways to think, right? So I figured, hey, why don't we get together people who are either like, already pretty proficient with it or are interested in it. And then therefore we can actually share different, best practices and all that stuff, right? So that's kind of the origins of Mind Map Nation.
Yeah, I'm excited to check it out too. There's you get a couple of free books with signing up, which is awesome, and as well as being part of a community that's usually a good way to learn. Communities are awesome. And Martin here is saying, I guess this is similar to journaling, but in a graphic form. I've been journaling for a while now, and I found it amazing for my mental health and organizing thoughts. I used to journal a lot, and this year's been tough. I just haven't been able to carve out the time and space to journal. And I noticed the chaos that is ensuing in my mind from not being able to untangle everything and just iron it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Same, man. Same.
Yeah. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, it's fascinating because one of our Mind Map Nation members the other day during our office hours, and we have weekly office hours, which I should actually just rename as cafe hours, because really, it's like us talking through like the topics that matter to us. Is he asked me, hey, who would Sheng be if I never encountered mind mapping, right? That took me aback for like a good 15 seconds. I was like, holy crap, I never actually considered that. It's almost like part of my identity now. It's like second nature. My eventual answer was writing, right? So those two tools, mapping and writing, I literally have a traveler's journal in front of me right now that has different inserts. One is an insert for mapping, right? Where I draw all my maps. The other one is literally a journal for writing. And these are, I guess, like they have different uses for me. Mapping for me is an extremely intentional intellectual exercise. It engages the rational mind by a lot, because think about what you're doing while you're mapping is that you're methodically deconstructing and connecting things, right? So that engages the essentially the rational mind a lot. For writing, especially journaling, is a highly emotional affair for me, right? It's almost like a stream of consciousness. And these two tools are also very different because one is nonlinear. Whatever thought pops to your head, you kind of just like draw it out. Writing actually forces us into a more linear mode of thinking, if you think about it, because by nature, you have to go from left to right and then top down, right? That is a very linear direction of actually going about, making anything. So I would say that mapping has really helped me kind of untangle a lot of external chaos in a lot of ways. But if I really want to solidify some of those learnings, I'll actually do journaling as well.
Comment coming here from a good friend of mine, Emily, says she loves the concept of non-linearity. Embracing the mess of communication is so important. I definitely, absolutely agree.
Absolutely.
Speaking of mess, like my day-to-day life is sometimes a mess with a 2.5-year-old kid and work and all
Oh
that
man,
stuff.
yeah.
And you had this great video on how you can use mind mapping to kind of do your day-to-day and handle, I guess, your to-do list.
Totally.
I've been I'm a huge fan of like to-do list, but
Yes.
sometimes I beat myself up because there's so much left undone on the to-do list. So like it kind of demotivates me from using the to-do list. I'll sit there and I'll write down all the stuff I need to get done. It might be 10 or 12 things, which is far too many, and I don't know how to estimate the amount of time it takes to get any of those done. And I just, the end of the day, 2 or 3 things get done. Like, so much more is left undone, and I just feel bad. Talk to us
Yeah.
about how maybe mind mapping can make it a bit easier for us to navigate our day to day.
Yeah. So with my mapping, it's interesting, right? Because I actually use a mind map every single day to actually organize my day. So the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, I mean, first of all, get ready and stuff, and then I go to a cafe because that's actually where I work these days, right? But I don't actually bust out my laptop first. There's two things I do. The first one is journal. The second one is actually map, and I map more often than I journal these days. And my map is actually of my daily to-dos. And because and I do this because I want to know what is the direction that I want to take my day, right? The problem often with linear to-do lists, in my opinion, is that you sometimes lose track of the bigger picture of where your day actually fits into like the bigger scheme of where you want to push your life, right? So for mapping, for example, I would actually map out rather than do the tasks, map out the tasks first. I actually map out the major areas. So for example, for me, it's creation, because now I'm a full-time creator, right? There's creation. Right now, I'm also hiring for an assistant. So there's hiring. And then there is, let's say, meetings and social stuff and stuff like that. That's social. And then there's like another category, whatever it is, right? And then under content or create, I have LinkedIn, I have YouTube, I have newsletter, right? And then from there, only then do I actually expand out the individual tasks that go under, let's say, YouTube, writing a script, filming, or being on this podcast under social, right? Because I've mapped it out with that kind of hierarchy, I always have the bigger picture in front of me. That's what I did in the morning, was literally draw out, visualize my day, but in a graph, basically like a graph form or mind map form. So I know where, okay, what I'm doing under YouTube fits under creation. And in my mind, I actually have a bigger map, which is where does creation fit underneath my creator career, for example. And it's also tied to my why, which is to help people organize their chaos. So from there, from one map, I'm able to trace, okay, I'm working on this video because of YouTube, because of my creator component, because I want to help people, right? By mapping it out, I actually see my life as a system that's connected rather than a disjointed collection of tasks that I just need to check off. That to me is the difference between intentional living versus the grind.
Absolutely love that, man. So well put. Um, how does mind mapping fit in with other kind of, I guess, ways of organizing your thoughts? So, for example, are you familiar with like Tiago Forte?
Yes,
Yeah.
second
So,
brain.
yeah,
I
yes,
guys, I think I got his book here. Actually, it's pretty
yeah.
cool.
It's right here for me as
Yep.
well, within arm's reach, right there. And I've read the book and I've gone through his course as well, and it's helped me.
Oh, you have? Oh
Yeah,
man, that is an expensive course, my friend.
yeah. That's one thing I like don't cheap out on is like I sometimes spend too much money on courses, but I always invest in myself as long as there's one thing in there that could
That's
help.
on
You know what I mean?
yourself.
Um,
Exactly. It's worth it, dude.
yeah. So it was a good course, and it did help me a lot. Like my so as a data scientist, especially in developer relations, like I need to have a healthy relationship with information. Um, I'm constantly learning new things, and I'm learning new things from a variety of sources, and I need to take those sources and distill it down into my own kind of words in my own way, so then I can present it and then teach it, express it to other people.
Yeah.
So Tiago Forte, like his whole system in the book is code, capture, organize, distill, express. Um,
Exactly. Yep.
and just to brief primer for anyone listening, capturing is like, okay, you're online, instead of like bookmarking stuff on Medium, bookmarking stuff randomly on your Chrome browser or whatever, just put it all into one central place. So I use
Yeah.
Matter. That's where I capture all my
Yeah.
stuff, is Matter app. And then from Matter, it'll sync into my Obsidian vault. Obsidian is my vault of choice.
Yes.
um, and what will get synced is, once I capture a article and it
Yes.
goes into Matter, I'll do my highlighting, and it's the highlighting that gets put into my second brain.
Yes.
So now I'm wondering, and then after highlighting, it's distilling. So once I look at everything I've highlighted, I'm like stripping stuff away and just getting to the essence of it, and then from there I'm
Yes.
creating. So that's kind of what code is. Where would mind mapping fit into that process? Would it be, um, in the distilling part or the expressing part? Like if I've got a system like that, how
Yeah.
can I fit mind mapping into this?
Gosh, I've actually thought about this a lot because I'm kind of a productivity nerd myself, right? And I also have to, watch it too, because sometimes the process becomes the point, and that's not the point. So in that sense, what I love to, for me personally, I actually use mapping to capture as well, right? If you think about what I just talked about, using mind maps for podcasts and lectures and stuff, that's actually part of the capturing mode, right? And then from there, it's interesting too, because within mapping is actually a process of organization too. There's capture and organizing, because you're also thinking about where things fit on the map. Sometimes I'll literally erase or actually drag, because I use a notability app, or let's say an electronic mind mapping app. You can actually drag things around. So you're actually organizing the information and rearranging the hierarchy of that information as well, right? So you already have capture, organize. Distill is interesting because I also have a built-in distill step into my maps. So different people have different styles of mapping. Some people are extremely graphical or visual. So I've seen people who are artists, right? And if they're learning about, let's say, oceanography or something like that, they'll actually like draw fish, sharks, reefs, and all that stuff like that. I'm not those people. So I'm actually much more philosophical leaning. Therefore, the power of words are extremely important. Because if you think about words, all they are symbols to represent meaning, right? So with the right word or the right term, it can actually represent entire like picture worth of meaning for me. So in that respect, when I map, I actually only pick like certain keywords that really resonate. That's another concept of second brain too, which is you grab things that resonate with you, right? I only capture the things that resonate with me. So there's already a step of distillation there. And then finally, there's expression. That's the only thing that I feel like my maps are not great at, because, a map is representative of your brain, of the way you think and process information. It's not necessarily representative of somebody else's, right? The only times that I use mind mapping to express myself is if I'm working in a team or with my coaching clients, right? Because then I have to go back and review and tell them, oh, this is actually what it means. Or if I'm actually making, because I used to be a product manager and product designer, I used to design products using mind maps. And the map will actually, let's say I'm designing like Airbnb, the app, right? The app has 5 tabs. Therefore, my map will have 5 child nodes representing each of the tabs, right? Each of those tabs then expands out into its individual user journeys and purpose. So in this way, before I even touch Figma, Sketch, or whatever design app, I actually create a blueprint mind map of the product with all the different user flows and connections, and I present it to my team and express what I mean to them, get approval, and then I touch Figma to design the actual app, right? So in a lot of ways, a mind map has actually the potential of fitting in all four of the code components of capture, organize, distill, and express. But there's no one tool for everything, right? So for me, maps are really more around kind of like the capture and the distillation parts, actually.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for sharing that. That really is insightful and will help me as I navigate this relationship with information that I've got. And you mentioned, having philosophical bent there. One thing in particular that we talked about in the intro is Stoicism. And if listeners long enough, or those who've been listening to me long enough, know that I'm a huge fan of Stoic philosophy. I've had a few.
Awesome.
Yeah, I've had. Do you know Donald Robertson, who wrote How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, a book about Marcus Aurelius? He's been on my podcast. And
yes, I literally have his book like right there.
Yeah,
really.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, he's an interesting guy, I bet.
Yeah, absolutely loved chatting with him. And you have, at least, I don't know if it comes up different for everybody on YouTube, but like the top video that comes up on YouTube is your Meditations of Marcus Aurelius and how to be invincible. Like kind of talk to us about that. Talk to us about that video, kind of what the main takeaway for us is in that video.
Yeah. You're talking about the project management one?
No, this was
the Stoic philosophy one.
Stoic philosophy one. It's the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, How to Be Invincible.
Yes.
That video.
Yes, that one. No, for sure. Yeah. So that video was actually based off of this book, which is, Meditations, right? For people who know Stoic philosophy. It's and it's the private journals essentially of basically the last great Roman emperor. I made that video actually in hopes of sharing, something that's actually really helped me out a lot in my personal life. So for those who are not familiar with Stoic philosophy, it's literally like a, over 2,000-year-old philosophy that originated from ancient Greece. And it's really about, first of all, coming to terms with fate, right? Because everything, our world is like super chaotic and everything, right? So in a lot of ways, it's about, maintaining our inner equanimity so that it doesn't matter, what happens externally. You could either be fired from your job, right? Or you could get into a car accident or whatever it is, right? But the whole concept is that nothing can touch the mind if you don't let it. So all of us have the power to maintain our equanimity. So I would say that video was really about that because, it's not just help ordinary people, but it's actually literally helped kind of like the most powerful person in the world. And what I loved about Marcus Aurelius, as well as Seneca, is that they're both practitioners as well as philosophers. He's literally a philosopher king, right? So
yeah, there's that's the original self-help book. He wrote that book to help himself. And there's a album out by Akira the Don. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Akira the Don, but he's pretty dope. He does so he took Meditations Marcus Aurelius and made it into like a hip hop album. Just the first just the first book at least. He's also done similar things, like he'll take interviews from David Goggins and turn them into tracks, and he'll do he's done Seneca's couple of writings from Seneca's, turn them into songs, and same thing with Epictetus and stuff like that. He's actually been on my podcast as well. He's dope, dude. Akira the Don.
That's amazing, actually. What another way of expressing, renewing something that's old, right?
Yeah.
Because I think what I appreciate about, Stoic philosophy, maybe, you see this too, which is, our human nature has not really changed in the last 2,000 years, right? Like we might be like, we may be sending people to the moon and to Mars and stuff like that. And we're talking about Web3, we're talking about the metaverse, about the Matrix and all this. But at the end of the day, like human nature, the words of Seneca and Marcus Aurelius still ring true today as it did 2,000 years ago. And there's something timeless about that.
Yeah, I mean, 2,000 years is not a long time in like, the
No.
history of humanity. We're still essentially the same animals that we were back then. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of Seneca, you had a awesome video that was you started off with a quote from Seneca: "Life is long if you know how to use it,"
Yes.
and then you go into the goal funnel framework. So talk to us about that goal funnel framework.
Yeah. So, first, life is long if you know how to use it, right? That quote from Seneca is really just about, and it's actually part of a much longer, a bigger passage where he talks about, people get distracted, you know, by fates, by, the latest trends, by whatever it is all the time. And then, what is truly important then, right? So I would say, and then I go into the goal funnel of goals, which is my framework of actually goal setting. So I don't typically really like goal setting in the sense that, oh, like this is what you want to be, and therefore you should just keep on going at it. I actually see goal setting as a way of discovery of oneself, of what you actually want to do, right? So the first question I ask people when they, ask me about goal setting or funnel goals is I just ask, hey, who do you want to be, right? Do you want to be a community leader? Do you want to be a good parent? Do you want to be like the best in your field, or, make a bunch of money, or whatever it is, right? What is it that you want to do? And then we work backwards, right? So you have basically the overarching goal of who you want to be. And then we map out, almost we create a life mind map, roadmap of how would you actually achieve that goal? Who do you know actually already? It could be a celebrity, or it could be somebody, within your own life, right? What is the life path, or, the ways that they have, the paths that they have taken that have worked for them that you want to emulate? Let's map that out too. So in my example, I actually talked about, because I'm a runner and I've wanted to get into like Ironman, triathlete, and stuff like that eventually, right? The first question that I ask myself is, why do I want to go into do this Ironman thing? Why do I want to do this lifetime achievement? Then, I answered with, well, it's kind of like an identity thing. I want to experience that kind of like achievement, but it's also because I want to become more fit. I want to learn. I want to force myself to learn swimming, even, right? And then you map out all the ways to get there once you answer your why, right? So it's like learning how to run, swim, and bike, and all those things can then be broken down into short-term goals. Because if you told somebody to go run an Ironman tomorrow, it's impossible, right? You have to do a triathlon first, and then maybe before that, maybe a half marathon under the running bucket. In order to run, that assumes that you even have running shoes. So if you don't have running shoes, go buy some running shoes, right? But map out all of the steps, which means that the further you go along this road mind map, the closer it is to the immediate actionable steps that you can take. And this is where I actually break things down at the next step into 2 week sprints, right? So let's say I wanted to do, be a YouTuber with like 100,000 subscribers or something like that, right? Well, the first thing is that I have to actually, create videos consistently week after week. In order to do that, there's like multiple steps to do that. So I can break that down into 2 week sprints, so that, maybe this week is actually to write the script for 5 videos. Next, over the weekend, I'm going to, next week, I'm going to edit it. So this makes that journey of 1,000 steps of achieving, let's say, that YouTube with 100,000 subscribers, it starts literally with like 2 weeks. So that's what I mean by the funnel goals, which is identifying who you want to be, why you want to do that or be that, and then map out the roadmap to get there, and then breaking it down into 2 week sprints, which then can actually be broken down into Pomodoros, 25-minute blocks, right? So it's just intentional living and in kind of like a building block form.
Speaking of pomodoros, you had another video out that you're talking about. The pomodoro technique is it's a broken technique. So what is wrong with the pomodoro technique as we know it, and how can we kind of improve upon it or fix it?
Yeah, no, for sure. So that video's title was, the Pomodoro technique is broken. How we can fix it, and part of it is because when you do Pomodoros, to the intensity that I do it for my 2 week sprints, you eventually actually almost feel like you're an automaton. You're almost like a machine just going about doing these tasks and then tracking it, right? So I feel like the way that I have approached my 2 week sprints as well as my goal setting and figuring out where they belong in the bigger picture has actually helped me live more intentionally. Because the problem with Pomodoro is when you just do it day after day is that you kind of forget the purpose of why you're doing it. You're kind of just like following another script. Whereas in reality, life is kind of unscripted with a lot of randomness and self-discovery and everything else, right? It's a search. So I would say that video was about injecting more purpose and tracking your progress to your purpose using Pomodoros.
Thanks so much for sharing that. Seeing if there's any questions coming in from LinkedIn. If you guys have questions, feel free to drop them here. In the meantime, man, let's talk about community building. So you've been on this community building journey recently. Talk to me about what that's been like. How like what have your kind of struggles or pain points been with
Oh
building
man,
community?
this could be a whole different podcast featuring you, Harpreet. Actually, this is for those on the show. This is actually how you and I bonded actually over a community talk, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you run your own community over Slack and all that, and I was just telling you, hey, I just launched my community last week. This was a couple months back. Uh, uh, it's been a whole journey, man. It's it invariably changes, as you know. As soon as you get even one member in your community, the culture is already forming. It becomes a live organism rather than just a house that you have built. Your job as a community leader is to build a house and direct the conversation and foster the culture, but is not to actually, form the culture, right? That actually forms organically, is what I'm learning in real time. And I feel like, I had a launch week for my community where I had a gazillion events, meetups, and stuff like that because you want to start a new community strong. Just inject tons of energy into it. And already within that first week, I can already see that it was changing in a way that I didn't expect. Right? I didn't expect that office hours that actually turned into cafe hours, where we're just around the shooting the shit basically, right? But going into rabbit holes with a mind mapping kind of like context, sometimes not even optional. So and I very quickly I realized, oh, I don't need to ask me anything anymore because these are already organically happening during office hours, right? Anyways, these are just like all these little learnings that I have found and discovered pleasantly during the community building phase.
Yeah, like so the community I'm launching is part of the organization I'm at, Desi. It's called Deep Learning Daily, and it's
Yeah.
I noticed that there's a bunch of practitioners out there. Sorry, a bunch of communities out there of learners but not practitioners. So there's a lot of practitioners out there who maybe we're lacking a community where more advanced people in deep learning are hanging out and talking about challenging problems and really only problems that only experience can surface. And so I started Deep Learning Daily on October 17th, 2022. It's now November 15th, 2022. Month in,
Wow.
I started with a small cohort. And so,
Yeah.
this is a free open community that
That's
anyone
awesome.
anyone can join.
Yes.
And the way I started it was I just spent a lot of time researching people and just looking people up and looking for ideal candidates. So I put in a lot of time hand selecting people to be part of the community and got it down to about 25 people after looking at about 400 different profiles.
Wow.
And got it down to 25. Everybody was excited. Everybody, was hyped up about it.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
but then it's like crickets. Like these people who are so like handpicked for this. Like I extended
Yeah.
an invitation, handpicked, and
Right.
they're not engaging or participating in the community the way that I would want it to. And I'm doing all these events and I'm kicking stuff off. Um, and that's a bit frustrating. It's like, okay, you know what? Like I
It is,
can't
yeah.
get people to do like some
Talk.
things that are in our
Yes.
control and others not, right?
Yes.
That's kind of like the the mindset I got going into this. So it's like, okay, well, how do I make this an amazing place? Well, do I go and focus on the people who seemed gung ho and now just haven't even accepted the invite to the community?
Right.
Or
Right.
do I find people who are just sporadically, like, logged
Yes.
in once and haven't ever?
Yeah.
Probably not. I should probably go focus on the people who actually keep coming back and
Exactly.
figure out why it is they keep coming back. What do they like?
Yeah.
And kind of double down on what's working with them to attract the
Yes.
right people. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's tough building community, man. Like it's an essential job, I think, for any startup organization, especially a developer tool company,
Yes. Absolutely.
to have some type of community function. But I don't think people actually understand how difficult building community is, how much effort it
So,
takes.
and that's the thing, right? Which is, we're in the Silicon Valley, we're all about scaling, right?
Yeah.
Whenever you get out founders talk about scaling, engineers talk about it, investors talk about it, but human relations is one of these things that is actually much more difficult to scale. And I think a lot of people actually underappreciate the difficulty of that, right? Because it's not like code or media. So these are like the modern forms of leverage code and media. You write a line of code, you're able to distribute like a product to 1 million people thanks to AWS tomorrow, right? Or the App Store. Or you create a podcast and you distribute it to like 60,000 of your followers here on LinkedIn. Highly scalable. A community by nature is actually at its core, the most minute unit is a one-on-one interaction.
Yeah.
It's inherently unscalable. But that's also the metrics. If we're talking about a new project and then there's the metric node, what I look for in a community is actually the one-on-one kind of interactions. So just this morning, I just got off office hours / cafe hours with my members, and 2 of them were like, oh, I'm actually here for Emmanuel, because I get to like talk to him and we get to share these things. In my head as a community manager, I was like, yes, that was a huge win, because that means there's a potential for them to actually message each other offline or, and respond to each other's chats. That's the only way to make the community scalable, is by emphasizing the least scalable on paper components.
Yeah, that's that I made a tweet about this a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago or something like that, and a lot of people agreed with this. Like, to make a community scale, you have to do the unscalable first, and so it's a lot of like one-on-one Zoom calls, a lot of just talking to people.
Yeah.
It's challenging, it's tough, but it's it's an essential function, I think.
It is also because you're fostering the leadership within the community too, right? Yeah. Because those people who keep on coming back, eventually they could actually be moderators. Yeah. Eventually they're going to run their own events. That's what it means by doing scalable things, because it takes a while, just like any kind of relationship, is that it takes a while for people to open up, be vulnerable, to actually connect deeply and all that. The same thing too, but it's like the bamboo shoot kind of analogy, where you might have to grind for like 2 years. All the growth is happening underneath, and then it shoots up like 50 foot tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it, man. Great way to put it. So let's go ahead and wind down. I'll do the my traditional last question before the random round, so then we'll open up a random question generator and just kind of go through there. But the question is, it is 100 years in the future. What do you want to be remembered for?
Ooh. Man, I want to be remembered for helping people live more intentionally, right? I think that's actually what I'm all about. And it doesn't even have to be large numbers. It doesn't have to be scalable. Even if I help, like, let's say 5 people live their lives more intentional, I think I'll be happy.
I love it, man. I love it. I'm definitely about to start living more intentionally. I'm looking forward to joining the community like right after this. I'm about to go sign up and start getting on this mind map journey.
I like that intention.
Yeah, man. Yeah, gotta make it happen. I think this is a bit of a self-help junkie, and a bit of a invest a lot into stuff, and it's hard to find stuff that works. And historically, mind maps have worked for me. I remember going through the interview process, like when I was transitioning to data science from biostats 5 years ago, and mind maps were a tremendous help in helping me organize my thoughts and get just get this knowledge like into my head in a manageable way. And now that my relationship with information is tripled, quadrupled, like there's so much more coming at me. I'm looking forward to learning more about the system and being.
And Harpreet, that's the thing, right? I feel like I got to get you in the community and talk about mind mapping for interview prep. I feel like that's something that a lot of people could will find it useful these days.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. So let's go ahead and jump up into the random question generator.
Oh boy.
First one is, what's something you wish you'd figured out sooner?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's so many, right? But the thing that really comes to mind is that what I realize is that the time spent with people is not indicative of the amount of deepness you can go with in relationships and friendships with people and everything, right? And I say that is, sometimes I know somebody for like 2-3 years, but do you actually know them? However, if you approach something with transparency, honesty, and vulnerability, those are actually relationship accelerants. That actually reduces the time that it takes to actually get to know somebody. So I wish I had known that earlier, sooner.
Damn, I love that. Gems. Gems, man.
Yeah.
What is one of your favorite smells?
Oh gosh, new book smells, and sounds kind of nerdy, but the other day I actually I saw one of my books, one of my friends who actually doesn't read, with a book in her purse. I can't remember the name of the book. And the first thing I did was actually open it up and smell it. And I was like, oh, this is a new book. And she felt like she was judged. She was like, yeah, well, what do you mean? I was like, oh no. I'm just noting it.
I used to be all about the physical books, as you can see. Like I've got an
Oh
extensive
yeah, totally.
library here, but I've recently been moving to ebooks and using
Yes.
ebooks, and
Oh,
uh,
convenient.
yeah, primarily because of that, the Tiago Forte course, and
Brain. Yep,
yeah,
exactly.
and I was like,
Mhm.
yeah, this does really make it a lot easier to get information. But some books that I think are just worth having in as many formats as possible. Like,
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Exactly.
who is one of your best friends, and what do you love about them?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Um, I would say that one of my best friends is my wife, actually, Olivia. So um I would say it's because I what I love about her is that she is always herself regardless of any situation, right? I feel like for most of us there's like kind of some kind of like fear of judgment, either craving for positive judgment or aversion from negative judgment, right? Regardless, it's still that. I feel like for her, she somehow just like skates above that and just like bees, it's very liberating actually. And that's actually something that I've actually, gotten or rubbed off on me as well, which is actually, phenomenally beneficial for my personal growth.
Oh, that's awesome, man. That's awesome. She sounds like an awesome person. We'll do the final one
Mhm.
here. When people come to you for help, what do they usually want help with?
Oh man, it's interesting. Often they just want to talk, right? That's the thing. Sometimes they actually don't need their problem solved, but when they do need their problem solved, it's usually something that's very chaotic. It's either related with like key decision making in their like professional lives. Hey, where do I want to go next? Or it within their personal lives, like they feel crappy in a certain way, or they need more clarity. And it's because I'm really good at organizing chaos, just structure thinking and mind mapping and all this, but also just like life experience and deep listening. So those are the things that people usually come to me about.
Awesome, man. Well, Shang, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the show today. I
Absolutely.
appreciate having you here, man.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here, Harpreet. Thank you.
Cheers, man. Yeah, and my friends, remember you got one life on this planet. Why not try to do something big? Cheers, everyone.
There you go.